Hi, I'm Caitlin, and this is my project, Is CO2 Affecting You? And in my project, I took a CO2 sensor and I measured my room in different circumstances to see what the level was. And the purpose of this was to see how the CO2 level in my room would affect me during online learning and what is the optimal condition I can have my room in to help me during online learning. And the reason that I did this was because I saw a video of a man on YouTube who went into an airtight bubble and he tried to measure the CO2 in there while explaining the different effects of high levels of it while he was experiencing these effects. And I wondered how smaller amounts of these effects could affect us during online learning. So the first things that you're going to need to know before you go into this is that the level of CO2 in the atmosphere is about 400 parts per million. So my hypothesis was that if my room door was closed and I was in the room without any plants, the level of CO2 in the room would be 800 parts per million. And I also thought that if I opened the door and I was in the room without plants, the CO2 level would drop quite a bit into a safe area. And my last part of my hypothesis was that adding plants would help reduce the amount of CO2 in my room. I didn't think it'd go down to 400, but I thought it'd get pretty close into a safe level. And so when I did my experiment, I didn't open any windows because it is winter, but I measured different variations of having the door open and closed, me in the room and out of the room, and my plants in the room and out of the room. So I had 3 spider plants, and that's what I did. So the worst case in my room that I got to was with the door closed, with me inside of it and with no plants, and the highest measurement of CO2 there was 861 parts per million at that point. Of course, the best one was when I was out of the room and the door was open and there weren't any plants, and that just had the level at 400. I didn't test it with my door open and with plants inside and me not in there, because I thought that if plants were supposed to make the air cleaner, then it wouldn't really have an effect. It was kind of pointless. What I was surprised about while actually doing this was that when I exercised in my room with the door open and plants in my room for school, I found that the level of CO2 actually skyrocketed to over 600 parts per million, despite the fact that the door was open. And I also discovered that for my hypothesis, I was right about the levels in my room reaching over 800, although I was surprised with how low overall they were, because I did think as an average they'd be quite a bit higher than they were, but so I was surprised by that. And then I was also right about the levels going down when I opened the door. They never did hit 400, but they looked like they were on there. I think I'd need a longer test to be able to do that. And I was wrong. Well, for the plants, it was an inconclusive because I wasn't able to discern what effect they had on the room. And I think the problem with that was that I didn't consider that I needed to start the experiment each time at the same level, because it never truly did even out when I started it with different levels. So with the results that I got, how are these levels affecting my cognitive function while I try to learn online? Well, I looked at different studies and it seems that there was a lot of disagreement on how the different levels will actually affect your cognitive function, and I think it stems from how cognitive function is actually measured in the different studies. And some have found that like 5,000 parts per million does nothing, and others have found that 900 parts per million could decrease by 12%. No one really knows how it will actually affect your cognitive function, but I'd say seeing this and knowing that mine are like most of the time lower than 900 parts per million, I don't have to be that worried. It seems to depend on what you're doing and how it will affect you depending on what you're doing. But I know that even if I just open my door, the levels will drop down to a safe amount. So I don't have to be really worried at all. So some of the difficulties that I found while I was doing the project actually came more from putting the project itself together, because for putting it together I had to attach some wires into my CO2 sensor, which I could then attach plug into my Pi, and I had to solder them, and the problem was that the soldering iron that I bought was too old, and so the tip of it was oxidized, and the problem with that was that the solder wouldn't stick to anything, and so I couldn't put it on. And I didn't buy any Flux originally when I bought all the materials that I thought I would need, because I thought I wouldn't need it and I'd be fine. I was wrong about that. And so by the time that I actually needed it and I realized that I needed it, all the stores were closed. So I bought different solder that had flux inside of it, but that didn't work either. So then I watched a few videos on YouTube, did some researching, and I bought a different type of flux called tinning flux, because I didn't have the type that I actually wanted, and this one was supposed to work well enough. And I rubbed it all over the tip, and then I wrapped the solder around the tip and just left it on horizontally for it to heat up, and that did work. I did burn one of the holes, but overall, considering the situation, it went pretty well. The things that I enjoyed the most with this project was the soldering, because that was a pretty cool experience, although I also did like setting up the experiments. And when I did my project, I did it at home, and I had help from both of my parents to help me with the coding of the CO2 software. If I were to continue this experiment, I'd redo what I did with the plants. I'd have the starting point for the plants be the same for all of them, so I'd probably like air out my room, I'd have the windows open, I'd have the door open, I wouldn't be in it, and then I'd put the plants in, so that way everything could start at like a single level, and then I'd probably compare with other things, but I'd have it all start at a single level, because that was something that I didn't consider. And then the other thing that I want to do is I would want to test different room sizes and also different ages of people, because one of the things that I found when we first got the sensor is that my family went on a car trip to test it, and so we were all in my van, and the level of CO2 actually surpassed 2,000 parts per million, which is quite a bit more than the amount in my room, which I think measuring outside of my experiment as well only ever surpassed 900 parts per million. So yeah, so it seems that the amount of people or the size of the area that you're measuring will have an effect, so I'd like to kind of test the effect on that. And also, another thing that I discovered while doing this experiment that really surprised me was that the furnace actually makes a difference. Turning on and off actually makes a difference, and so when I put all my data into graphs, I found it going up and down, up and down, up and down, and that was because the furnace was turning on and off, and that actually did have an effect on my data, so that was pretty cool. Anyway, that's my project. Thank you, and bye.